Massive waves of American bombers descend on the Third Reich. The Luftwaffe employs a shocking new tactic to turn back the tide, using their own airplanes to ram American bombers. Now you're in the cockpit as German pilots crash headlong into the American onslaught. Experience the battle. Dissect the tactics. Relive the Luftwaffe's deadliest mission. Next on Dogfights. April 7, 1945. German Bf-109s rise into the skies above their homeland on a top-secret mission. German martial music is broadcast from the ground, at times interrupted by a woman's voice.
Ihr seid die Verteidiger von dem deutschen Volk. Vergesst nicht die Frauen und Kinder, begraben in den Trümmer von Dresden.
These are the men of a new fighter group, the Sonderkommando Elbe. Theirs is the most astonishing mission ever devised by the Luftwaffe, to ram their own aircraft into American bombers. To the west, the vanguard of a massive formation of 1,300 American bombers of the mighty 8th Air Force thunder into central Germany. The individual bomb groups that compose the bomber streams reach a predetermined initial point, or IP, then split off towards their own targets.
As they do that, they're really tightening up their formations, and they know that they're going to be over the target within the next 10 to 15 minutes.
One of these massive formations is led by the 389th Bomb Group, the Sky Scorpions, 31 consolidated B-24 Liberators, the most widely produced four-engine heavy bomber of World War II. Group Commander Colonel John Herboth is in the cockpit of the lead plane, the Palace of Dallas. No one aboard the gleaming Liberator can possibly imagine what is about to happen. 7,000 feet above, Sonderkommando Elbe pilot Heinrich Rossner spots the bombers of the 389th. He's alone. Poor flight coordination has separated him from his comrades. His lightly armored Bf-109 is ideal for this high-altitude surprise attack. He pushes the stick forward, opens the throttle, and hurtles towards the trailing B-24s intent on one goal, a brutal mid-air collision.
That must have been kind of a surprise to see this lone aircraft coming through and get close.
Rossner yanks the stick back and pulls up out of his dive, but he overshoots his intended victim. Now, Rossner brazenly pulls into formation with the very Liberators he's bent on destroying.
He meanders in and out of the formation, almost like a shark waiting to capture its prey.
The American gunners are stunned. They can't fire on the German fighter as it wends its way through the valley of gleaming aluminum. Rossner's mind races. Somehow he must complete the mission. He'll swing outside the formation and position himself to do the unthinkable. Ram the lead B-24 directly in the cockpit. Rossner hopes he can knock the American out of the sky while surviving the violent impact. Rossner jams the stick left. In the cockpit of the Palace of Dallas, Herboth and pilot Bob Dallas sight the 109 as it banks back to the right, directly towards them.
There pretty much wasn't anything they could do about it, but take on what they saw what was coming at them.
Like a steel battering ram, Rossner rips into the cockpit of the Palace of Dallas, then careens into another B-24. The moving mass of the 109's 6,000-pound airframe slices through the thin aluminum and steel framework of the bombers.
Somehow he manages to bail out. He lands in his parachute and survives the whole ordeal.
But the men on board the bombers are not so lucky. The pilots struggle desperately with the controls to keep their planes in the air. It is only the beginning of their ordeal at the hands of the Sonderkommando Elbe. The Sonderkommando Elbe was born of Germany's near-complete devastation wrought by the Allied strategic bombing offensive. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was a mere shadow of its former greatness, unable to defend the homeland.
The Luftwaffe was going downhill rather quickly toward the end of the war. One of the problems is they had lost a lot of their command pilots. The Luftwaffe fighter forces were made up mainly of young enlisted pilots.
Desperate action was needed. A young colonel named Hahn delivered an audacious proposal: send hundreds of Bf-109s skyward, not to shoot down American bombers, but to ram them.
It
was supposed to be shocking. The Americans were supposed to be shocked. They were supposed to have such fear that they would say, no, we are not flying anymore.
Dass sie gesagt hätten, also nein, wir fliegen nicht mehr. Eine Art und Meuterei, also ein Wahnsinn ist das gewesen, aber trotzdem ist es gesagt worden.
Hermann believed that at least some of the Elbe pilots would survive the brutal encounter, bail out of their destroyed fighter, and return to base ready to undertake more attacks. The goal was to force the American 8th Air Force to suspend bombings for 4 to 6 weeks. It was hoped that this would buy Germany enough time to amass sufficient numbers of the new Me-262 jet fighter to win back control of the skies over the fatherland. A call for volunteers was sent out on March 7, 1945.
He asked for volunteers for a special mission with a 10% survival chance. Now, we were young, 19, 20, 21 years old. We never thought we'd die. So for us, that 10% meant a 90% survival chance.
Die Folgen der Luftangriffe und
The consequences of the bombings, especially dead women, dead children, and dead elderly, triggered sharp emotions. I thought I had to do something.
ansteigen lassen und ich habe mir gesagt, also hier musst du irgendwas tun, du bist Jagdflieger.
2,000 volunteered. 300 were selected and gathered at Stendal Air Base on the Elbe River. Most were new pilots with little or no combat experience. From the beginning, their training was limited.
We didn't even have enough fuel to check the technical condition in a test flight before the mission.
Nevertheless, permission to proceed is granted by Adolf Hitler. A date for the first attack is selected: April 7, 1945. A Against a force of 1,300 American bombers and 800 escort fighters, a meager 180 fighters are mobilized for the ramming attack.
Sollte dann die Sache gekrönt werden, aber der Einsatz war, wie gesagt, von vornherein sehr fragwürdig.
At this point, the war had already been lost, and there was little chance of turning it around. It was nothing but sending pilots to the slaughter.
Der ja sowieso so gut wie verloren gewesen ist, dass da also kaum noch irgendwie Chance bestand, eine Wende zu erreichen.
Now, Elba pilot Heinrich Rossner has initiated the effort with staggering success, ramming the lead element of the 389th Bomb Group. The Palace of Dallas is shattered. The men in the nose section, including Group CO John Herbo, are dead.
What's going on in these unpressurized B-24s is catastrophic noise and screaming and yelling and metal groaning and breaking and violence, total violence.
Only 3 of the 11-man crew managed to escape the doomed airplane. In the deputy lead plane, pilot Walter Henkel fights to survive.
Immediately, the plane starts in a dive. First Lieutenant Henkel is using rudder, yoke, anything he could possibly do to fly the airplane.
The Liberator is unresponsive. It continues a slow outside loop.
The airplane is nosing over, creating extensive negative Gs. They are up in their seats, they're out, they're reaching down for the yoke. As the airplane totally noses over, almost fully on its back, pulling negative Gs, huge motions now start breaking the airplane apart violently.
Henkel's plane disintegrates, but miraculously, Henkel and his co-pilot, James Tollison, are thrown clear. The rest of the group is shocked by what has occurred, but nevertheless continues the run-in from the IP.
When an aircraft is shot down, it is not an orderly sight. The feeling is, there, but for the grace of God, go I, and it may still happen to me before this is all over.
The group reforms. Perry Sessoms, lead of the High Right Squadron, assumes command. In spite of the loss, the 389th will deliver its bombs on target. But the Germans have more destruction awaiting American bombers further back in the stream. The brutal ramming assault by the Sonderkommando Elba has yet to reach its full fury. April 7th, 1945. Bf-109 pilot Heinrich Henkel cruises at 32,000 feet. He is a volunteer with Germany's ramming unit, the Sonderkommando Elba. Heinrich Henkel is one of the few to survive this extraordinary mission.
Permission was given for a free fight. Normally, we always attacked in groups, but now everybody could pick the closest target where he thought he could be successful, and that's how it was done.
10,000 feet below him, he spots the bomber stream. They are B-24s of the 467th Bomb Group. Henkel pushes over into a dive. The vibrating cockpit and whine of the engine may be the last things he ever feels or hears. He picks a target, a B-24 Liberator called Sack Time. They're nearing the target, a munitions factory at Crummel. Nose gunner Joe Flynn readies the bomb release.
It was quiet. It looked like it was going to be a milk run, and then we turned when we hit the IP initial point to do the bomb run. That's when all hell broke out.
Henkel is here. Sack time is here. Henkel will streak in from above, relying on the element of surprise. Then, with total disregard for his own safety, he'll do the unthinkable. Ram the tail section of the B-24, using his wings and propeller like a cleaver.
Beseitigt, dann ist es flugunfähig.
If you take off the tail section, the airplane can't fly anymore. That was the most effective method of destroying the enemy.
An den Gegner heranzukommen, ja.
Henkel streaks in, making constant adjustments to his attack angle and velocity. Aboard sack time, tail gunner Robert Perkins calls out a bandit at 5 o'clock.
My father said, though, he heard a change in his voice, and suddenly he began to shout into the interphone, "He won't turn away, he won't turn away."
Heinrich Henkel closes in at over 400 miles per hour, ignoring the 50 caliber rounds hammering his aircraft. He's fixated on knocking the Liberator that looms before him out of the sky with one savage blow. The radical tactic of ramming had precedent in recent Luftwaffe operations. In 1944, a unit called the Sturmgruppen had embraced ramming, though only as a last resort.
If they weren't able to shoot the bombers down by cannon fire, machine gun fire, they would ram the tail of the bomber and bail out. Their idea wasn't a kamikaze type suicide ramming. It was a ramming so the pilot could get out.
The Sturmgruppen employed specially armed and armored Focke-Wulf 190. But the hundreds of pounds of extra weight rendered them extremely vulnerable to more nimble U.S. fighters. This figured importantly in Hajo Hermann's approach with the Sonderkommando Elbe. Hermann opted for a completely different and much more dangerous tactic. He selected very lightly armored Messerschmitt Bf-109s. The stripped-down 109s could climb much higher than American fighters and then dive on the bomber formations unimpeded.
Und Panzerplatten ausgebaut.
Weapons and armor plating were removed from the normal planes. All we had left was one MG-131 with about 50 shots, so that the airplanes were as light as possible.
So leicht wie möglich waren.
The Sonderkommando Elbe developed 3 unique methods of ramming. Elbe pilots were instructed to use the steel propeller of the Bf-109 to destroy the control surfaces on the tail. They could also ram the wing near one of the bomber's engine. The last, most ghastly method was to swing in from the side and ram the cockpit. The bomber pilots inside would be killed instantly.
Wenn man mit 200 Kilometer Überschuss auf ein Flugzeug stürzt.
When you're closing on an aircraft 150 miles per hour faster than its speed, the question is whether you're going to hit it where you want to hit it. You only have split seconds.
Da hat man nur noch Bruchteile von Sekundenzeit.
It was never intended that the pilot fly home. The Bf-109 would not survive the impact. The most an Elbe volunteer could hope for was to somehow survive the crash and bail out. Despite the extreme danger of the tactic, Elbe pilots did not view themselves as suicide pilots or kamikazes.
Die japanischen Piloten
The Japanese pilots had explosives in their airplanes,
ihrem Flugzeug
and with that had to sacrifice themselves. But we Elbe pilots use our airplane as a weapon. The BF-109 and its metal propeller that served as a saw. We hoped we would have the opportunity to get out with a parachute.
Wenn es möglich war, auszusteigen.
Now, Heinrich Henkel steels himself for the violent encounter, hoping it will not be the ultimate sacrifice.
Ich habe bestimmt etliche Treffer in der Maschine, aber
My fighter was hit repeatedly, but I wasn't hurt at all. So I could still ram the enemy's tail section with my wings.
Gegners dann mit meinen Tragflächen beseitigen oder rammen. Ja.
Just before impact, Henkel catches a glimpse of tail gunner Robert Perkins.
Gut, saß dann.
He was sitting there and lifted his hands in terror when he realized that I was coming closer. I probably would have done the same thing.
Aber ich wollte das nicht ausdrücklich hier.
Henkel makes a final adjustment, aiming his right wing at the vertical stabilizer. Pilot Bob Winger watches in amazement as the 109 cartwheels outside his window.
Was he close to us? Extremely close. The distance between our wings was several feet tall, and he disappeared from my view. Of course, I was a bit excited.
It just looked like it had a nose, period. No propeller at all, because they were wrapped in.
Navigator Walter Parker is nearly thrown to the floor by the impact.
He saw the German fighter plane cartwheel over the front of the plane, and he said he was able to see the swastika on the tail of the plane as it cartwheeled over, and he knew right away that they had been rammed.
Henkel is violently slammed by the collision.
Henkel is still alive. He's in his airplane, but he's incapacitated. The airplane is just tumbling positive, negative G's.
He struggles to release his seat harness and manages to throw open the canopy as the 109's wings are ripped off. The force ejects Henkel from the cockpit moments before the plane explodes.
Allerdings bestand dann die Gefahr, dass der Gegner
There was still the danger that the enemy fighters that protected the bombers would shoot you in your parachute. That happened in a few cases.
die einzelnen Leute noch am Fallschirm abgeschossen haben. Haben sie auch zum Teil gemacht.
Henkel plays dead, tumbling from 20,000 to under 4,000 feet. He pulls the ripcord on his parachute. Incredibly, he survived his ramming attack on the American.
Ja, beim Aufsprung hatte ich hier.
When I hit the ground, I suffered a few wounds. I was pulled through some bushes by the parachute. When you do these things for the first time, you don't know what you're doing. But I wasn't really hurt, just a few scratches.
Keine Verletzung. Bis auf ein paar Hautabschnitte.
But Sacktime's ordeal has just begun. As the Liberator shudders on impact, the left wing drops violently. Winger fights the controls. Nothing has prepared him to fly an aircraft that's been hit by a 6,000-pound battering ram. He has only seconds to recover, or Sacktime will be ripped apart. April 7th, 1945. The German ramming assault on U.S. bombers has claimed another victim, the B-24 Sacktime. Now the once graceful bomber is plummeting out of control. In the nose, Joe Flynn is desperately on the intercom, asking what to do with the bombs.
I called twice that you want me to drop the bombs, and I didn't get an answer. Bombs away. That's it. I didn't get the answer. Twice I dropped the bombs. Flick the switch, and that's it. You're gone, baby.
The B-24 lurches as it sheds the weight of 5,000 pounds of high explosive ordnance. Pilot Bob Winger strains at the controls as the Liberator teeters on the brink of destruction.
In the fraction of a second that he had to make a decision to prevent that airplane from flipping over and going completely out of control, he instinctively made the right moves and was able to stabilize the aircraft almost immediately.
The brutal ramming attack has inflicted grievous damage. The bomber's right vertical stabilizer is sheared off. The German's propeller has torn a gaping hole in the right rear fuselage, and the bomb bay doors are jammed open. Winger is able to keep the airplane aloft, but the loss of critical control surfaces on the tail forced the left wing down. It takes superhuman effort to keep the Liberator from flipping over. Winger and co-pilot Jeff Nard must both apply full right rudder and aileron to stabilize the wings, while holding the control yoke in their stomachs to keep the nose up.
We were doing everything we could to just maintain this 30-degree angle there.
Two P-51s, long-range fighter escorts nicknamed Little Friends by the bomber crews, join up with the struggling SAC time. The P-51s escort SAC time towards the safety of Belgium. It's an excruciating journey for Winger and his co-pilot. If they let up for a second, SAC time will roll over and break apart. With nothing but brute strength, the men hold the 20-ton behemoth in the sky for an agonizing 45 minutes. Confident that the B-24 is safe from enemy fighters, the P-51s break off. The fighter on the left peels away, but the Mustang on the right pulls in front and rocks his wings in salute. But as he throttles away, the bomber is suddenly hammered by a mini tornado of prop wash. The Little Friend's gesture is not well received on board SAC time.
It's everything Winger and the co-pilot can do to keep the bomber airborne and to keep it flying. To have gone this far in this whole mission, in this whole catastrophe, and to be knocked out of the sky by prop wash from one of your own escort airplanes, it was almost ridiculous to try to even fathom the whole thing.
Winger and Nard make one last heroic rally, their aching muscles fed by pure adrenaline. Again, they manage to pull the Liberator out of a terminal dive. After walking a tightrope for what seems like an eternity, SAC time finally arrives over an emergency airstrip in Belgium. Bob Winger knows the aircraft cannot land. He orders his men to bail out. Walter Parker and Joe Flynn jump out the nose wheel door.
Parker jumped first. I gave him the choice. He was bigger than me. So if he could fit out under the wheel, then I knew I could fit out under the wheel. I wasn't being brave.
The last crewmen left in the plane are pilot Bob Winger and co-pilot Jeff Nard.
Now it's time for the co-pilot. Winger orders his co-pilot back aft and out the bomb bay doors.
Winger grips the controls with all his waning strength to give Nard time to bail out. After several seconds of holding the B-24 upright, he releases the controls and scrambles for the bomb bay door.
Winger reaches the bomb bay doors. The co-pilot is still back there sitting on the edge. He can't see the ground, and for one reason or another, that inhibits him from jumping.
He was waiting there. I just wanted to bail out when there was no ground, and I pushed him some.
Winger quickly follows Nard out the bomb bay doors. SAC time staggers skywards. Then the G-forces wrench off its battered tail section. Walter Parker watches in amazement as the tailless bomber plummets.
It began to spiral down within the same area that the crew had just bailed out into. And my father said that it passed probably within 50 to 100 yards of him and Joe Flynn, the nose gunner.
Propellers still churning. What's left of sack time hits the ground and explodes. In eerie silence, the crew drifts down towards the countryside. Incredibly, all 9 crewmen survived the savage ramming attack delivered by the Sonderkommando Elbe. The massive German ramming campaign continues over central Germany. B-17 flying fortresses of the 3rd Air Division drone deeper into hostile skies, unaware of the brutal welcome in store for them. At 1 p.m., a squadron of Boeing B-17s close in on their target, an ME-262 fighter base at Parkham. 20-year-old pilot Bud Wentz flies in the lead squadron.
The weather was beautiful. We were, our group, the 487th, was the lead group of the 4th Combat Wing.
Elba pilot Klaus Hahn is heading out to intercept the Boeings. His thoughts are overwhelmed by the grim reality of his fate.
The
feeling was simply that you are most likely flying your last flight today and that you wouldn't return from it. You will probably be dead. That thought was a part of it, and you had to accept it, and you had to deal with it.
Der Gedanke hat natürlich mitgespielt und den musste man mit in Kauf nehmen und musste man eben auch irgendwie verkraften.
Though they've not spotted each other yet, the German and the Americans are on a collision course. April 7, 1945. Sonderkommando Elbe pilot Klaus Hahn searches the skies for a sign of American bombers. His mission seems suicidal. Use his own airplane as a battle axe to be thrown against the thin skin of the bomber. He has been separated by his comrades by engine trouble.
Kamen 4 Maschinen auf mich zu.
Suddenly, 4 fighters were approaching me. I assumed that they were German Messerschmitts.
Im Schwarmverband, also immer jeweils zu 4, das war die Flugformation.
But they aren't Messerschmitts. 4 American P-51 Mustangs are closing head-on with Klaus Hahn. As part of Germany's ramming unit, Hahn's Bf-109 has been stripped of its protective armor and primary weapons.
Zum Beispiel,
we only had 1 machine gun with 60 shots. All other weapons had been removed, so we definitely weren't fit for a dogfight. The 60 shots were a joke.
Die 60 Schuss, das war eine Farce, war das, ja.
The P-51s fan out. They'll approach the single Bf-109 from 4 different angles. Hahn is a sitting duck.
Und die sind ja dann ausgeschwärmt und sind Schussposition.
It wasn't a dogfight, it was a barrage.
Es war, wie gesagt, ein Beschuss.
The Mustangs open fire. 50 caliber rounds pound the 109. A bullet shatters Hahn's left arm.
Und ich wunderte mich, dass ich plötzlich den Gashebel nicht mehr bedienen konnte.
I was wondering why I couldn't use the throttle anymore, and then I realized I had no feeling in my arm or hand. The bone had been shot right underneath the shoulder joint. I wasn't in pain. I didn't even notice it because of all the excitement.
Wahrscheinlich durch die ganze Aufregung.
Hahn tumbles out of the sky, trailing thick black smoke. But he is not dead yet. He grips the stick with his good arm and struggles to recover from the spin. As he does, a stroke of luck. An American bomb group is directly below him.
Also, soweit ich mich erinnern kann, habe ich solche
I
Gedanken.
can't say why I still rammed. Perhaps desperation. I won't say that it was courage. It was desperation. I've already made it this far. I can also get through a
Aber
ramming.
ich bin nachher ausgestiegen dann. Ich will nicht sagen, dass es Mut gewesen ist. Es war Verzweiflung wahrscheinlich.
8,000 feet below Hahn, B-17 flying fortresses of the 487th Bomb Group are unaware that they've been targeted. 20-year-old pilot Bud Wentz is among them.
We were the lead squadron in the lead group, so there's nothing in front of us except open air. And the planes were on each side of us, and when the formation was tight, they were about 10 to 12, 14 feet apart.
Bud Wentz is here, in the middle of the bomber box. Klaus Hahn is here, diving at over 450 miles per hour on his target. Ignoring the blood and pain from his mangled arm, Klaus Hahn pulls out of his dive behind the formation. He adjusts slightly, fixated on completing his mission, flying his airplane into the tail section of the B-17.
Es hieß uns, es war vorgegeben, nach Möglichkeit den Bomber an der sogenannten Sollbruchstelle zu treffen. Die
They instructed us to hit the bomber in the weakest part of the fuselage.
an der ein Flugzeug, wenn es irgendwie notlandet oder sonst irgendetwas.
A bomber's airframe was weakest at a point behind the wings, but forward of the ball turret. If rammed in this section, the aircraft would almost certainly break in half. Klaus Hahn unhooks his harness and rolls the Me-109 inverted. He hopes to fall out of the 109 before impact. He suppresses the urge to turn away.
Ich hätte das Kabinendach allerdings abwerfen müssen dann vorher.
The canopy was still on. I don't know how it came off. It's beyond my knowledge. It all happened more or less subconsciously.
Dazu war das alles mehr oder weniger zu, ja, wie soll man sagen, sensationell.
The 109's steel propeller blades demolish the B-17's tail. The mid-air collision throws Klaus Hahn from the cockpit like a rag doll. The wrecked fighter tumbles, its left wing gone, still lodged in the tail section of the B-17. On impact, Bud Wentz's fortress shudders.
There was a great big whump, and the plane rattled, and I immediately grabbed hold of the wheel real tight.
Hahn tumbles through the sky, out of control. He's lost so much blood, he's on the verge of blacking out. The B-17 pilot and the German who rammed him are both seconds from certain death. April 7th, 1945. As part of the top-secret Sonderkommando Elbe, Klaus Hahn has rammed an American B-17. The collision has thrown him from his doomed fighter. Hahn gasps for breath in the thin air, struggling to find the ripcord of his parachute with his one good arm.
Aber wie gesagt, das verlässt mir den Bereich der Ritterlichkeit.
I was in free fall until there was more oxygen. I pulled the ripcord at about 3,000 feet.
Die Gipfelhöhe waren etwa so 11.000 bis 12.000 Meter.
Though severely wounded, Hahn has survived the carnage of his ramming attack. He parachutes to safety.
Ich habe auf jeden Fall mir Gedanken insoweit gemacht.
I was thinking, I did it. I am alive despite the slim chances of survival. I rammed a bomber.
Ich habe einen Bomber gerammt, also mit anderen Worten, ich habe den Befehl ausgeführt, das war alles.
Bud Wentz's B-17 is reeling from the mid-air collision. His tail section is wrecked. He fights the controls with all his might.
By holding on the controls real tight, as soon as I sensed it, thinking of the airplanes around me, it prevented the airplane from making some radical move.
Incredibly, he manages to stabilize the wounded fortress. Over the intercom, he shouts for a damage assessment.
They looked out the back from the top and side turret and said pieces were flying off the tail of the airplane.
The rudder and elevators are destroyed. In the cockpit, the rudder pedals and pitch controls are useless.
I was afraid if I used the ailerons on the main wings, that if I too much of that, the plane could flip over because there were no stabilizers, and I didn't want to be upside down in B-17.
Wentz throttles his engines up and begins pulling out ahead of the formation. If he does go down, he won't take another fortress with him.
We were inside Germany at the time, and I didn't want to land in Germany if I could, so I figured I'll keep the airplane aloft as long as I can and head west.
With such extreme damage to the tail, he must find other means of maneuvering the bomber.
If you were to make a left turn, you'd pull the throttle down on the outermost engine. When that engine goes dead, the plane tends to turn that way. So you make a skidding turn. They're not very sharp. You don't bank. They were awfully big turns.
By carefully adjusting the throttles, Wentz manages to turn his wounded bomber westward. Tail sections still shedding debris.
So we went for perhaps 20 minutes. And when I'm so, there's a single runway with trees all around it, and I don't see any airplanes on it, but I'm sure it's a runway.
Displaying remarkable airmanship, Bud Wentz manages to nurse his wounded B-17 into final approach and lands at the airfield.
And then a couple soldiers came running out of one of the buildings, and thank God they were American soldiers. And it so happened infantry people came up and captured this little airfield.
April 7, 1945 was the only combat mission flown by the Sonderkommando Elbe. Results were disappointing. Of the 180 Elbe pilots that went into combat that day, 60 returned to base with mechanical problems, and an estimated 47 were shot down by American fighters. Only a handful succeeded in ramming bombers.
The Air Force really played this down and never wanted to admit that these were purposeful things.
The 8th Air Force did not publish detailed reports of ramming incidents and attributed them to inexperienced or dead German pilots.
According to our records, about 22 to 24 successful rammings occurred.
No matter the actual number, Sonderkommando Elbe's objective of regaining control of German skies was not achieved.
How successful could we have been? What success could we be against such superior numbers? That's not a question at all. A success? It was not a success. Yes, we scratched a little bit at the number of bombers of the 8th Air Force, but the strategic goal Colonel Hahn wanted to achieve, in my opinion today, an illusion.
In meiner Meinung heute eine Illusion.
There simply was no stopping the Allied bomber offensive. The desperate ramming campaign exacted a terrible human toll, but could not even momentarily stave off the Third Reich's inevitable defeat.